From Hamilton Place Strategies in Washington, D.C., this is the HPS Insights podcast.
Welcome to HPS Insights, a podcast from Hamilton Place Strategies, analyzing the current events impacting the business and political communities. I'm your host, Andrea Christianson, Managing Director here at HPS. I'm joined today by Matt McDonald, HPS partner, and special guest Jess Pavel, former policy director for Mitt Romney's 2018 Senate campaign and HPS alumna. The title of today's podcast, So You Want to Work on a Campaign. We'll be discussing our experience on campaigns, what it's like getting a job, and what life is like after the campaign trail. Although HPS does not work on political campaigns, we have many people here who have worked on campaigns and who have gone to work for campaigns after their time here. All right, let's get started. So first, I want to hear a little bit about everyone's experience on campaigns. So Matt, let's start with you.
We should start with you guys because mine is going to take up half the podcast. So.
Not if you keep it short.
All right. Okay. Let's see. I started on campaigns. So I guess back in 2002. So I worked on I started on the gubernatorial re-election for Jane Swift in Massachusetts. She dropped out when Mitt Romney got in the race. I did a little bit of freelance work for Mitt Romney's lieutenant governor candidate at the time. And then moved from Boston down to D.C. I worked at the NRCC in the 2002 cycle. I stayed there during the off year, which is a little different than most people. And then I was the rapid response director for President Bush's campaign re-elect in 2004. And I started that in 2003, so I was there for a long time. And then as campaigns go. Then I worked in the White House, which is not a campaign. And then I worked on Governor Schwarzenegger's re-election. I worked after business school. I worked for Senator McCain on the road. I was the advisor, but I did debate prep and speech writing. And then I worked on Mitt Romney's presidential campaign in 2012 and worked on all of the private equity issues. And then I did some other stuff, but that's the highlights.
Okay, so a lot of Mitt Romney here.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
So you either really like campaigns or are a glutton for punishment.
Or both. Yeah.
Jess, you had the most recent campaign experience also with Mitt Romney. Mm-hmm. So want to talk about what you did?
Yeah, so that was actually my only campaign, was the 2018 Senate campaign. But working in D.C. and working at HPS, worked with a ton of folks who had a campaign experience and, sort of wanted to explore what that was all about. And so I think my experience getting on a campaign was sort of the perfect experience or summary of what it's like, of how fast they really move. Had an initial conversation about the possibility of there even being
Can you move here next Monday?
Exactly. I think it was 10 or 12 days later, was picking up my life and moving out to Utah. But it was great. I mean, they're dynamic, they're fast. I was working there before I was really even hired. There wasn't some formal onboarding process. It was, we're launching this thing in T-minus 15 days and we need to be prepared.
Yeah. For me, I've only worked on two campaigns. I worked on the McCain presidential campaign in 2007, and then Kristi Noem's re-election campaign to Congress in 2012. But what's interesting, I kind of want to ask you guys about, is the career opportunities that come from the campaign experience. For me, anyway, my first boss on the McCain campaign in 2007 is essentially how I have my job at HPS. So there's a lot of connections, and working on campaigns creates a lot of opportunities. So can you both talk a little bit about how you think that your campaign experience has impacted your long-term career opportunities?
I would say that, everybody is interested in politics and campaigns. It's interesting broadly. So, it was interesting when I was in business school, doing very standard business school corporate recruiting stuff, is that is a differentiator, and it's something that people think is interesting, and they're always curious. Campaigns are on the front pages, so people follow them. They think they know what's going on. They want to talk about that stuff. They don't always. It's not always clear to people like how that translates to whatever they may be doing. But certainly one of the nice things about campaigns or politics generally is that they only last for so long. So there's a little bit of a forcing mechanism of working in multiple places over a short period of time. And the impact of that is that you get exposure to lots of people and you get to work with lots of people. And if you do a good job, people notice and the opportunities come. So there's a little bit of career accelerator, I would argue, for people who have an interest in the space and do good work, is that you get exposure pretty quickly, and the whole world is best understood as kind of like a very thick network and not necessarily a hierarchy, right? From a career perspective, I don't know. That's how I think about it in retrospect. I don't know just what your experience has been since more recent.
I think that's right. I mean, you have to have a good attitude. You have to work hard. There aren't clear lanes. There aren't clear roles. And people like to think that there is comms and there's policy and there's digital, but often those lines get very blurry. And so I think you really have to have this mentality of it's all hands on deck. And then after that, opportunities will come. But these are truly short-term gigs, right? You can't come out of it, or you can't go into it thinking that you're going to get a job at the end of it. That's a huge mistake. You have to approach it like you're only going to be there for a few months, and you're going to do everything you can to get your candidate who you believe in elected to that first week in November. Yeah,
the time after a campaign is like, it can be very anxiety-inducing from just a job perspective.
Definitely.
Most times campaign staffers are young, I didn't have a ton of like cushion in terms of
finances.
So it's definitely like the campaign's over, and then depending on the campaign, there might be like another paycheck or maybe not. And then even if you won and maybe you have a shot at working on like the official side or something, like they don't get sworn in for a little while. So there's a gap. And I mean, definitely one thing to think about is like saving a little away just for that particular zone, because you want to like take your time to get the right thing. You don't want to, I mean, I don't know, when I was doing campaigns you couldn't like pick up Uber driving on the side or something, but
which I think brings us to an interesting point for people who are thinking about working on a campaign maybe in 2020. What should they expect going into a campaign? And I think that the thing is there's no real clear view of what you can expect. Each campaign is going to be different. They're going to be organized or disorganized in very different ways. So I think, can we talk a little bit about what someone should expect going into a campaign, or what that campaign's going to be like when they get there?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I transitioned from being at a place like HPS where there are very clear processes and a manual of how you get tweets approved, going into a campaign setting where none of that exists, right? And you can't get bogged down by not having a process or not having a manual to do something. You can institute what you think is important, but at the end of the day, it is very nimble, and you need to be ready to just jump in with whatever experience you have and take it in any direction. And a lot of times you're making decisions on the fly, and you can course correct at the end, but you may not have full information when you're making decisions.
A little bit, don't ask permission, ask for forgiveness kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of judgment that goes into that. It's very much a, if you think about the more corporate end of some of this stuff as like even at HPS, we have a week-long training before people start, and there's a lot of built-up processes. There's a lot of built-up norms. A campaign is a startup, and depending on when you join, I mean, sometimes people can join and feel like they are new and that everybody knows what they're doing. And the reality is that probably the last person that a bunch of people started a month ago. Like it's just very new, and you create the norms and processes as you go, and you got to use your best judgment and kind of work your way through it. It's it's tricky like that.
Yeah. So here's a question. So how do you actually get a job on a campaign?
So I would say that it's mostly networking is where you should start thinking about it. I would say that there are a bunch of campaigns. So most of the campaigns, and my campaign experience is a little more I'm weighted towards most of the campaigns I've worked on are presidential campaigns. So that's a little bit different than like
humble brag.
Sorry. It's a little bit different from a congressional or even a Senate or gubernatorial race. I mean, I worked on a gubernatorial race too. But at that level, some of those campaigns just get piles of resumes, and they rarely have systems in place to actually evaluate those in any way. And like, it's a dumping ground of resumes. And so the same way that it's a networked environment is that networking into those things is an important way to get attention. People, in defense of the campaigns themselves, people don't have time to go through some like very rigorous HR process to interview people, and even interviewing in Washington is not super structured generally, even outside of campaigns. So as compared to like corporate world, and so people really do value recommendations and people who call up and say, "Hey, you should take a look at this person. I've worked with them in the past and they're really good," right? The other piece of it is that, it is that people are in the problem-solving business. Where's the available body? So like, if you intern, volunteer, whatever, the odds of you getting some sort of full-time role are not zero. And just having, and again, like thinking about the network side of it is that even if you're interning or volunteering or whatever, and you're working for someone who's a full-timer and you demonstrate your capability, they will remember that. And if they're a campaign junkie, they may call you up next time around, that type of thing.
I mean, I got my start just by having someone connect me to the campaign. Mentor and dear friend said, you should take a look at this person. And that's how I ended up getting on a campaign. But we got thousands of resumes that would come in. And I had someone who reached out to me cold on LinkedIn because we were from the same home state. And that set him apart in the pile. And I said, we should take a look at him. He came out, joined the campaign as an intern, put his head down, did great work, and has stayed on for a long time with us because you need something that sets you apart when there are so many incoming resumes.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was an intern on McCain's presidential, I was in charge of going through the resumes, and I was told just throw away any resume that's not a page. So, I mean, that's how they start collating the resumes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's less sophisticated. It's not, you have to, I think that, look, the other piece of a campaign is super hard work. So first indicator of that, of tenacity, is your eagerness to get in front of the people who are making those decisions. So like, you're putting in, it's a pile of 1,000 resumes, and like, you might be a jewel of a candidate and the process isn't fair because they don't have time to make a fair process. There's just not time. But to Jess's point, like, go figure out who's on the campaign now. Figure out what your connection is. Get in front of them. Just demonstrate that you are eager and willing to do what it takes. And that's half the signal, honestly, because there is this dimension of like, when you're on the hiring side, you are going to hire someone to be in the trenches with you, and no one needs delicate flowers when everything is going sideways.
And you need to be able to pick up really quickly and move too. There's not this back and forth where you can decide if it's the right time for you to get out of your apartment lease and then find moving boxes and get across the country. If you're having this interview, you've got to be ready to go in 2 days and 1 day if they say, great, we need you out here.
Yeah, that's right.
So there are, give or take a couple, 17 Democratic candidates vying for the presidency in 2020. For people who are thinking about working on a campaign, what advice would you give them? Do you pick your person now and try to go on one of the 17 campaigns, or do you wait and see where that field goes and try to throw your hat in the ring a little later?
I would say that you're not going to regret working for someone that you believe can make a difference in the country. So if there's a candidate right now that you are really passionate about, get involved, knock doors, make calls, volunteer however you can, try to get on the campaign. If you're so on a candidate and want the experience, I would say probably wait.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, there's a difference. There's a difference if you're trying to break into campaign world or if you've done this for a while and have been around the block, right? But there's nothing wrong with like doing good work on a losing primary race. You're still going to learn a ton. People will take note of that. as an example, like Ari Fleischer, who was President Bush's first press secretary, who was press secretary from the beginning and press secretary on 9/11. My recollection is that in the 2000 race, he started working for Elizabeth Dole. And that after she had dropped out, at some point, he moved over to the Bush campaign and filled that role. So, like, there will be, after the primary season is over, there is going to be some heat and some bruised feelings and bad blood between the campaigns. But the reality is that talent will rise to the top, and people who do good work will be recognized in one form or another generally.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about common myths and misconceptions of campaigns.
You're listening to HPS Insights, a regular podcast from Hamilton Place Strategies. Be sure to subscribe to hear the latest from the HPS team on policy debates affecting the business and political communities.
All right, welcome back to HPS Insights podcast. I'm here with Matt McDonald and Jess Pavel, and we're talking about campaigns. Now we're going to turn to common myths and misconceptions on the campaign trail. And first question to both of you is, how was working on a campaign different from what you expected on your first campaign?
So I think hearing a lot of stories at HPS about folks working on the presidentials and seeing them from the outside, you get this idea that you have these flawlessly executed events and it all looks very seamless to the public, and then you get on it and you're in the thick of it and you realize it's just sort of organized chaos most of the time, and decisions are being made on the fly, and you're hoping that you're making the right decisions, and sometimes you don't, and you have to go back and think about it again and maybe change something up, but it really is sort of organized chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I generally have a view that any organization made up of people is messed up in some way, right? That is doubly true of campaigns. It is just, and it's a function of the pressure. It's a function of how much people are trying to do in such a short amount of time. It's just, there's a lot that goes into it. And and the optics, it's like that old joke about like the ducks floating across the water while the feet are scrambling underneath. That's a lot of what's going on in campaigns. And sometimes the duck doesn't even look that good going across the water.
So it sounds like things are pretty fast and loose and somewhat disorganized. But talk to me about how decisions tend to get made on campaigns. I mean,
the typical thing that you want to understand about a campaign from a strategic perspective going in is the limitation on resources. Okay, so you have 4 months, 5 months. November is the day. So your resources are time and money. On the time perspective, a lot of people toss in like travel to that, right? So it is there's a finite amount of time, and what do you do with that time? So where do you go? How do you spend your time? Where are you going to be able to activate voters, or what do you do with that time? Who do you get in front of? And then how do you spend your money? And what does that look like in terms of advertising or staff? How do you raise the money? That sort of thing. So those are the driving factors that drive all the decision making on campaigns. And so that's important to understand, because it is such a time-bound exercise that has a couple of implications. Is that, like Jess said, there's a fast decision-making process that goes into everything. So this is not an environment where you can let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You don't have time to go figure out the perfect answer over a month, because it's just too late. You have to move faster than that. And so that, I think that feeds into a lot of the dynamics of the decision making on the campaigns.
And I think too, presidentials, you are focusing across target states and where your resources are best allocated. If you're in a statewide race, though, you're still looking at where are the most voters located and how do I get my candidate from the north part of the state to the southern part of the state in the same 2-day swing, and we've got to hit the most number of people. And if you have other milestones like getting on the ballot or getting through the primary, those are all different decision points of how you spend your resources and where you concentrate time and money.
Yeah. The other thing to understand, I guess the second part of my two, is that the campaign itself is it's generally speaking, a binary outcome, and that influences strategic thinking also, right? So, people commonly lament the use of negative advertising in campaigns. Negative advertising works for campaigns in part because you only have two choices. So, if two soup companies are having a fight over who has more MSG in their soup, and people are like, I don't like that, they'll just start buying other stuff. And the dynamics of negative advertising in a corporate context where you're in a repeat game where it drags down the entire category are very different than in a campaign where the calculations are on who's going to show up to the polls, who's motivated. There's only, generally speaking, there's only two options. So that factors into the dynamics of why campaigns are the way they are. And from a strategic perspective and game theory perspective, people may not like it, but that's kind of, it all makes sense in that context.
Yeah, and going off of decision making, a lot of the first part of our conversation was about breaking into campaigns for people who are thinking about doing it for the first time. A lot of the people making decisions on the campaigns are people who aren't doing it for the first time. And so can you talk a little bit about the leadership side of campaigns, how that's structured and how they work together?
The leadership on our campaign had a lot of campaign experience. And I think that's helpful because you get this broader perspective versus other folks on the campaign, or like myself. It was my first time doing it. I think you need someone at the top who is ruthlessly attentive to detail and very meticulous in what they're doing. If not, it becomes very apparent to the public and inside of the campaign that there's, something else going on. It needs to be someone who is involved in all of the decision making and has eyes on everything before they go out. And when you have that person that is part of broader decision making conversations, it just goes a lot smoother.
Yeah, there's it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, I would say that there's a couple of pieces to be aware of. Is that decision making isn't super broad in most contexts, and part of the reason for that is just that campaigns can be leaky, or you need to have a place where you can have real conversations where it's not demoralizing to staff or volunteers or whatever. There's, I would say that high function campaigns have a low amount of senior advisors, and chaotic campaigns have a high amount of senior advisors. And part of that is that you get lots of patchwork solutions to different staff problems in campaigns that are a little chaotic. Some campaigns you can have the best campaign manager in the world, and it's still a chaotic environment or just a very tricky area to operate. But there's fundamentally, a lot of this comes from the candidate and how the candidate likes to work and operate and think. And there's lots of different approaches and virtues and values to different stuff. But it can create challenges, right? Another dynamic that most campaign staffers will talk about is the role of the spouse on the campaign, or a sibling who might be a chair, or that type of stuff. It's an important role in kind of defending the candidate themselves, having a bigger picture, knowing the person. That's really valuable. And it's also commonly people who may not have a ton of experience with it, and their judgment on decisions may not be as informed as some of the staffers who've kind of been through the ringer on some of that different stuff. So that's another typical dynamic that campaigns have a tricky time working through. So there's a lot going on at the top that even within the campaign people, may not have full transparency into.
So chaos, conflict, lots of things on campaigns. So people should expect it.
Yeah.
But how should they deal or expect conflict to be dealt with on campaigns?
Every time I finished a presidential race, I told my wife that I would never do another presidential race.
Well, there's conflict, within your own relationships, and then
that's a different podcast. That wasn't. I mean, she was wonderful in all of those, but that really didn't have anything to do with her. That was just like, it's a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
It's very stressful. Depending on the level of your race, your work is on the news in front of everybody, either at the state level or local level or literally across the country. Mm-hmm. I mean, I used to have my trick especially when I was rapid response director on President Bush's reelect, I was very much involved in like day-to-day messaging. That was basically my job. And my metric, I mean, this is weird to think about, but my metric was for whether we were getting the job done. I would call my buddies from high school and I would say, what do you think? What do you think about the race? And my metric was basically like, if I heard my talking points coming back at me that I had like written over the past couple of weeks, then that was good. That was working. And if I didn't, then it wasn't landing, right? But campaigns can be at that level of scrutiny, and you can't letting your head dwell on that for too long can really mess with you.
I think that's a great way to think about it. I mean, you have to be reaching out to so many different people constantly with the same message and really hammering it home, or else you're not reaching your core audiences. And ultimately, you're right. You do have a binary choice, like you said earlier, and it's not going to be your candidate if you can't break through to the voters.
Yeah.
Well, and I think ultimately it's not about you. It's about getting the candidate elected, and you have got to put your ego aside, your tendency to get easily offended aside, and just know that we're all in it and we're in the trenches together, and conflict is conflict and you just have to move past it.
That's right. I think despite any drama that could arise, you're ultimately not there for you, and you are creating a family along the way, and you're in it together trying to work toward the same common goal. And I think that's also a big difference between working in a corporate setting and working on a campaign is you, instead of being sort of in your own lane and doing your own thing for your own career, on a campaign, it's a totally different focus, and it's selfless in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, the interesting thing about campaigns too is that you can have campaigns that have phenomenal leadership in them that really brings the whole team together and behind a unified vision, behind the candidate, and the leadership. I mean, the leadership starts at the candidate, but it certainly doesn't end there. But it's not something that's taught in a campaign context, right? It's modeled, it's coached, but it's not a given. And it's not a given that the best managers or the best leaders rise to run campaigns. I mean, it is a very idiosyncratic world that's heavily networked. Comfort with the candidate can be an important component of it. I mean, so, going into these things, there's a dimension of it. You really have to have a mindset of, I'm going to make this the best experience I can make it. There is no guarantee that you are going to have great management on the campaign. There's no guarantee that that you will bond with some of the people that you're going through it with. Definitely doesn't necessarily mean that like everyone on the campaign is going to be on the same page. It can get messy, and that stuff is not a given.
Yeah. On that note, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll wrap it up with final thoughts, pro tips, and a couple of good stories from the campaign trail.
Every Friday, Hamilton Place Strategies founding partner Tony Fratto joins John Fagan and Brendan Walsh of Markets Policy Partners for the HPS Macrocast, an in-depth look at the macroeconomic news driving the week. Check out the latest episode at hamiltonplacestrategies.com/podcast.
Welcome back to HPS Insight Podcast. We're here with Matt McDonald and Jess Pavel talking about working on campaigns. This is our final segment here, and we're going to talk about funny stories and pro tips and final thoughts on working on campaigns. So to get our guests more comfortable, I'll start with a story of my own. So on campaigns, they're very high pressure, lots of conflict, lots of chaos, lots of disorganization. And you want to contribute and you want to fit in. And so I noticed that my manager often took smoke breaks several times a day. And he was a pretty...
No one does that on campaigns.
Never. And he was a pretty surly guy. And I wanted to, build a rapport with him. So I decided that I would join him on smoke break. So I went out, bought a pack of Parliaments, and said, hey, I'm going on a smoke break too.
So you didn't just tag along while he was outside. You fully participated.
Oh, yeah. No, I dove in
So
on
wait,
campaign.
have you ever smoked before, or this was purely...
I mean, a little bit in college. I mean,
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I dove in full, both feet. And we really did build a rapport, though, because those moments, outside of the campaign, it just allows for more, interaction and personal, relationship building. And that was really helpful. I'm not suggesting that people go take up smoking. There's other ways to do that. But
don't vape either. Don't take that either.
Moving us into the modern world. So that's mine.
All right, so I have one that wasn't. So this isn't about me, but it was a window into. Well, there's a couple things. Is that I think people have generally seen the shift towards celebrity aspects of campaigns, but I found this to be a really interesting window into what the crazy of campaigns sometimes. So on the Schwarzenegger campaign, on the reelect, so this is 2006, we were planning a bus tour to kind of kick off the general election after the Democrats had selected their candidate, and Arnold had there'd been in the prior couple of years, there'd been like the ballot initiatives out there that didn't go so well. He wasn't super popular. There was there's a bunch of protests, especially union protests and that sort of thing. So we had this bus tour set up, and on our first stop of the bus tour, there were a bunch of union protesters awaiting him at the first stop on the tour, and he got off the bus. And all the union protesters ran over to get his autograph.
Not shocked.
And it was an eye-opening exercise into what drives people's decision making, how they think about this stuff. You guys know me. I'm a fairly logical thinker, and that is not how voters think about stuff. And it is about attributes. It is about whether they feel like they know the person, whether they feel like that person shares their values and thinking and that sort of stuff. And Arnold was Arnold, and they were supposed to be there protesting, and they all just went over to get the autographs. And it was an interesting preview of some of the political trends over the past decade, but it was different than most campaigns.
That's pretty good. So you have probably seen that my candidate's favorite meat is hot dog, and there was a county fair in one of the counties, and there was a hot dog eating contest that we wanted to have him judge. Thought it'd be great, get in front of a bunch of people. Well, we get there, and he finds out there's no prize for eating as many hot dogs as you possibly can in a minute or 5 minutes or whatever the time was. So,
was he disappointed by that?
So disappointed. If you're going to eat this many hot dogs, let's get something out of it. And so he started his own prize for this hot dog eating contest and went around and started collecting donations from the audience members, brought kids up to judge and make sure that they were counting accurately, got the whole audience engaged and laughing, and raised $64 for the man who ate the most hot dogs.
I like it.
It is important for everybody to have fun on the trail, because if
you need those moments.
You definitely do.
Yeah. They can be grueling days. You have to have a few really funny ones.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move into any pro tips and final thoughts here. One is remember to lock your computer. People get a little punchy. They might try to send emails from your account that you don't know.
I think that's true in life, too.
Yeah, just generally true in life. Lock your computer. But also just, when you're on there, I think it's really important to really think about your judgment and using your best judgment. Your story about Schwarzenegger, I worked for him when he was the governor, and I was a traveling press person, and there was a time we were at an event at a racetrack, and he came out and he got booed and then made a speech and went on, and I was in charge of sending the readout out, and I didn't mention that he got booed in the readout because I was like, oh, that sounds really bad. And
the internal readout to like the rest of the communication staff, you mean?
Yes, the internal readout.
Yeah.
Anyways, of course, it came back in other ways that the governor got booed at this event, and it was a really good reminder that the reason I'm sending this readout is so that we know when things like this happen and we can plan for it. And so it's just when you're in the moment, don't be afraid to just say what's happening and lean into it, because it's important.
Yeah, that's all you got. You gotta kind of call it as it is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's right. We used to send daily clips around, and there was a few headlines we didn't want included in the clips and had them sent back to us saying, what about this one? How did you miss it on one of the key newspapers in the state? Well, you got to make sure it's all included so everyone sees what's going on.
Yeah. My thing on thinking about starting or going on campaigns is that just don't lose your anchor, don't lose your values for how you expect to comport yourself and behave, and like the things that are important. Because the flip side of like the aspect of the campaign having a finite end and the pressures that kind of come in on that, the flip side of that is that people can lose their way under that kind of pressure and make a lot of poor decisions, either publicly or internally or whatever. There's the history of campaigns is littered with people who, drank too much and made bad decisions, or sent out an email that was injudicious, or social media commentary, or whatever. And, you just don't want to let yourself get carried away in those moments with, to your point, bad judgment on things that in any other context you would have a different approach to. And because the other thing is that the campaign will end, and whatever the context of the relationships are that you built, didn't build, or destroyed on a campaign, those will carry over after the fact, and you want to live with that stuff comfortably after you're done.
Yeah, there's definitely a life after that election. Yeah. I would say that you really can't go into it treating a job like it's too small, or it's not your job description, or it's outside of your wheelhouse. Not only does that make you a pretty awful colleague when everyone else is all hands on deck, but it just shows that you're not in it for the right reasons. And I think if you're going to give so much time and effort and really work hard to get your candidate elected, you've got to be in it to show that you're willing to do whatever it takes. Not compromising your values, but in terms of what you're willing to do. Stuff envelopes, make calls, phone bank late at night, all of it.
Yeah, totally.
Such a great point. Well, thank you to Matt McDonald and Jess Pavel for being with us today and reminiscing about their campaign experiences. If you have any questions about those experiences or want to find out more about what we do at HPS, feel free to visit our website at hamiltonplacestrategies.com. I'm Andrea Christianson. Thanks for listening to HPS Insights, and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Insights podcast, produced by Hamilton Place Strategies. For the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at HPS Insight and visit us on the web at hamiltonplacestrategies.com.